You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we have yet another loss on the same topic for the Trump administration in court. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, Brian, here we go again. Just as federal courts, including the Supreme Court, ordered that the Trump administration must facilitate the return of Abrego Garcia to the United States, and of course he has been returned. Well, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals just issued a similar order with respect to another immigrant that was wrongfully deported to El Salvador. This time it's a gentleman named Jordan Melgar Salmiran, and I'll explain how he was wrongfully deported in a minute, but the Second Circuit Court of Appeals just ordered that the Trump administration must return him, quote, as soon as possible. And this one has a little bit of a twist. So let me kind of unpack what happened to Mr. Melgar Salmiran. He is somebody who was here illegally. He actually picked up a criminal charge for possessing a firearm unlawfully. He was convicted. He served a sentence. He was then pending deportation. And, you know, this, I think, highlights the point, Brian, that there are some people who have, earned their deportation. They came here unlawfully. They committed crimes, including felony offenses. They have their hearing, right? They get their due process rights of notice and opportunity to be heard in front of an immigration judge. And the judge considers everything, including the arguments through counsel of the immigrant, the person the administration is trying to deport, and the judge rules. That's what happened here. However, there is another layer of due process that people are entitled to, and it's called a reasonable fear hearing. When somebody says, listen, if you deport me to El Salvador, I will be tortured, persecuted, and or killed. So if you're going to deport me, United States of America, deport me to somewhere other than El Salvador. And that hearing was scheduled to take place. Now, here is why the Trump administration acted in defiance of a court order and unconstitutionally. It's sort of a criminal twofer for the Trump administration in this case. The Court of Appeals said, okay, we are ordering that the Trump administration not deport Mr. Melgar Salmiran before he has his, reasonable fear hearing. So, Brian, let me just touch on the chronology because it's important here. The Trump administration assured the court, the appeals court, that they will not deport this man before May 8th. The court swooped in on the morning of May 7th and said, okay, we are ordering you not to deport him at all, which shouldn't have been a problem, right? Morning of May 7th, DOJ assured them they wouldn't deport him before May 8th. Well, guess what? 30 minutes later, on the morning of the 7th, one day earlier than they had promised, they stuffed him on a plane and sent him to El Salvador, where he had a reasonable fear that he would be tortured, persecuted, or killed. So they violated both the court's order and they violated the Constitution because he was still entitled to that second step of due process, his reasonable fear hearing. So the Court of Appeals said, yeah, okay, now we are ordering you to return him as soon as possible. And they set some status dates because they want real-time reports. This is sounding a lot like the Abrego Garcia case, some real-time reports about what they're doing and, just to make sure that they're actually actively complying with the court's order.
So it sounds to me like the Trump administration would have won this case anyway had they just followed the rules and given him his due process. They wouldn't have been able to send him to El Salvador, but he would have been deported. And so what's the benefit for them to do this a day earlier than they needed to, get him sent there, now have to suffer the indignity and the embarrassment of a federal court telling them to go through the trouble of bringing him back when all they had to do was just give him another day, give him his due process, and send him to a different country?
So, Brian, I can't answer the question, what is the benefit to the Trump administration? In other words, what subjectively is going on in the minds of Donald Trump and his officials when they're defying court orders like this? However, I think it's a reasonable inference that they're just trying to consolidate dictatorial power. They're trying to undercut the power and authority of the courts. Because, listen, Donald Trump is an avowed day one dictator. We see him consolidating power in all kinds of ways. and he wants to keep stepping a toe over the line over and over and over again. But here's what I can say, because you asked the question, why might he have done that? They actually did give the court an explanation, and then let me read it. They said they blamed this sort of premature deportation on, quote, a confluence of administrative errors, which is a really nice euphemism for when you trample somebody's constitutional rights. So either, Brian, it is a confluence of administrative errors, which would make the Trump administration the most hapless, sort of negligent, incompetent administration of all time, or they're lying and they're doing it intentionally for reasons that we were just discussing.
I actually think this is a good example because, you know, from the very beginning, it's not necessarily about the virtues of each defendant here. And some of them will deserve deportation depending on what they did, and some of them certainly won't deserve deportation depending on what they did. And we've spoken about a lot of those people, including the gay barber, including Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and on and on. But this is an instance where somebody would have been deported. It's not like we're putting our own necks on the line for these, you know, every defendant in these cases, or saying that, you know, all of them are perfect and angels and completely innocent, because they're not. But it's just the matter of that everybody in this country should be afforded due process. It is a constitutional right afforded to everyone, regardless of whether you're a citizen or not. And if you claim that you're the law and order party, then at least just give them their due constitutional rights. And yet this is a perfect instance where even somebody who the Trump administration was in the right in seeking their deportation, the fact is that they are just so hell-bent on depriving everybody of their constitutional rights, so hell-bent on usurping all power for themselves and defying all of these court orders, defying any other branch of government that isn't the executive, that this is what happens. And so when we fight back against this stuff, it's not that, again, we're saying, you know, the defendant in this case is some angel here. It's that you're either a country of laws or you're not. And if that sounds like something that Donald Trump would say, it's because that is something that Donald Trump would say, but it's true. And it applies here more than anywhere else. If you are a country of laws, then even those who do ultimately deserve deportation, do ultimately deserve to be at the receiving end of the law, you're still afforded some rights. And so if you're going to deprive them of rights, then in fact, you are just as bad as the person that you're seeking to deport, because both of you are breaking the law in this instance.
Yeah, Brian, let me follow up on that, because what did we see in the Abrego Garcia case? We saw the Trump administration unconstitutionally deport Abrego Garcia. What was their explanation? Well, he's a gang member, MS-13. That doesn't answer the question, why did you deprive him of his constitutional rights? Let me tell you, as a career prosecutor, I never said, you know what, this guy that I'm prosecuting, he's a dangerous gang member. So fuck his constitutional rights, his due process rights. No, we do the exact opposite.
Correct. If anything, that's more of a reason to, because then you can so easily prove their guilt in court, which is exactly where that needs to be done. The worse somebody is, the more heinous a character they are, the easier it will be to prove your case.
And Brian, not to mention, if I'm prosecuting I've prosecuted serial killers, I've prosecuted RICO organizations, violent crime-driven RICO organizations. I've prosecuted rapists. If I were to violate any of their constitutional rights, guess what? Even if I won a conviction, it would likely get busted on appeal. What good have I done for the victim, for the community, for the American people? None. It's like a lose-lose proposition. But you know what? I was never looking to acquire dictatorial power as a prosecutor.
Yeah. Glenn, so what are next steps here? Now is the administration, do you presume, we have seen compliance from this administration as it relates to Kilmar Abrego Garcia, even though they're screwing him around in the courts. They tried to levy some trumped up charges in Tennessee, which it looks like he's going to be able to evade those, but they're still going to give him a hard time, and it's unlikely that they'll ever seek to let this guy go. But there have been numerous instances where they have had to comply with the courts, where they've asked them to bring them back to the U.S. So do you presume there's any reason that the United States wouldn't comply with this court order?
You know, in a normal world, which we are clearly not living in, we're living in a legal upside down, I would expect, particularly because the Trump administration seemed to acknowledge a confluence of administrative errors that led to this wrongful deportation, that they'll bring him back, they'll give him his reasonable fear hearing, his due process rights will be satisfied, and then he will be deported to a country that a judge believes is an appropriate place for him, to be deported to. But, here's my fear, Brian. What did they do with Abrego Garcia when a federal court judge and the Supreme Court judge laid down the law? They ended up charging him with a trumped-up criminal case, which, as you say, is beginning to fall apart now in Tennessee. So let's just hope that Mr. Melgar Salmiran doesn't, suffer the same fate, that they try to mitigate their unconstitutionality against him by trumping up criminal charges and using that as a pretext to bring him back, because, they've done it before.
Right. And look, it's crazy that we have to have these legal breakdown episodes where we castigate the Trump administration for, even in instances where their prosecutions are well-founded, they still can't keep themselves from just breaking the law every chance they get. Again, they would be in the right here if all they did was just follow the law and afford their defendants here due process. But even that, even the bare minimum, even what's required of the Constitution, they can't do to help themselves. And we're in a situation where the Trump administration is then embarrassed in federal court because they have to fix the errors that they themselves created for the federal government. So we will, of course, stay on top of this issue and any other legal issues that take place at the hands of this administration. For those who are watching, if you want to follow along as we cover all of these legal issues, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.